speaker is Rick Terzick, and he's the executive director at Cochran House, which is a chemical dependency treatment center in Hastings, Minnesota. I did some of my doctoral academic work at Hazelden and saw firsthand how significant of a role trauma plays in the formation and sustainment of addiction. And yet, it's a pretty rare thing in the chemical dependency field to find treatment centers that actually get that fact and help people heal from the trauma as they're helping them recover from their chemical use and move their lives into recovery. And so, when I first met Rick, I was super impressed because he's the director of a program and he really gets it. He really understands that there's a relationship there that needs to be addressed for people to actually have lives that are different and can be changed in the recovery process. And so I'm really glad that he's here tonight to share some of his learning and the things that he brings into his work. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. And Ryan had asked me to come and speak, and I thought that's great, and I'll do it. And it was about a month ago, and it's coming closer, and I thought, well, okay, I could put this in 15 minutes. I thought, ooh, that's going to be kind of tough when I do these kinds of presentations all day long and workshops with my staff. And one of the things I kind of really briefly just want to go through is that I've been in this field for 35 plus years. Didn't realize I was going to start out working in the field of addiction, but did an internship when I was at the University of Minnesota. I moved here from Chicago, and I was going to be a psychologist, and I was going to save the world and do all that kind of good stuff. And I chose this internship with St. Mary's at the time, which is now Fairview Riverside Hospital, and started touching upon the work with addiction, and not as much at that point in time. We really did much work with mental illness, but it was there. It wasn't that it wasn't there. It was just not looked at. And as my career path went, and I graduated from college and took my first job and ran a little outpatient program, and I was fortunate to move to England, and I lived in England for a couple of years working in a small, very private, exclusive treatment center, which was kind of someone in their 20s. It was like I was kind of thrown into this, wow, here we go. So I'm dealing with all different kinds of people. But it was really my first experience of working with people with trauma. Because chemical dependency field in England at that time was very new, and there wasn't a lot of education about what to do. It was just kind of a trial and error. Let's throw it out to the wind. And, because here we had Hazelden, we had all these other treatment programs. And then I came back here, and I attained a position at a hospital, another hospital, and I started a cocaine program, and I started seeing a little more of the trauma, more mental illness, this kind of thing, just kind of letting it flow. And so as my career went on, I started having an interest in looking at the field of addiction and going, there's something wrong, there's a piece missing in our field. I would see these patients coming into treatment. They would do their 12 steps, or their first step, the second, third step, or maybe the fourth and fifth step with the clergy person, and then go out and do some aftercare. And life was going on, and yet what was happening is these clients are coming back and saying, I feel empty. I don't feel fulfilled. I would much rather go and put a needle in my arm. I'd rather go drink a bottle of Jack Daniels. I'd rather go take a handful of pills because it's much easier. Or do some cocaine, or whatever it might be. And so, in the field, we started looking at more of the co-occurring disorder. We started looking at the issues with mental illness and addiction. And things were starting to, for me, they were starting to go, okay, the light's going on. And this is starting to make sense because we've got this mental health issue that's been really covered up with this addiction. And neither one has really been truly, really clearly worked with for the mental illness piece. Either it's been underdiagnosed, not diagnosed, or it's been overdiagnosed. And then, so as we moved on, I had an opportunity, kind of moving up in the last 6 years, I took over this program called Cochran Recovery Services. And a lot of my friends and colleagues said, what are you doing working in a facility like this because the place has got a bad reputation, blah, blah, blah. And that gave me more reason to want to really dive into this program. And I think that's just part of my nature. But one of the things that I saw is I saw these patients coming through and that were really broken. And we were seeing the clients that are coming through that have been through other treatment programs 5 times, 13 times, 200 detoxes, in and out of mental health, psychiatric block units, and coming to us and saying, this is really the end. I don't know what else to do. They've come from all walks of life. And so I started really digging in and doing a lot of changes and really looking at development of how this program needed to really take a look at. And we're still working on that, so we're not completely there yet. But one of the things that happened for me is I had an opportunity to go down to Florida and go to the, it was basically a professional weekend at the Refuge in Florida. At that point in time, Judy Crane owned that program, and now it's a part of Arcadia, and still doing really well and a very good program. And one of the things that was brought to my attention is said, would you be interested in doing an intensive, a trauma intensive? And I thought, okay, that sounds like a good idea. So my partner and I both decided, my partner's in the mental health field. He and I decided we got a plane, we flew down, and we thought, and of course my partner didn't realize that it was going to be pretty intensive, and he thought it was just going to be this kind of lecture for 5 days. But I had a little bit of wherewithal what was going on. But it was interesting because going through that process, I went through some of my own work. That's a lot. Because I've been in the field, and so I was doing therapy, I was doing all these self-care things, doing like self-help groups, and looking at my recovery and looking at all the other pieces, but there were pieces missing. And there was this, I had a moment when I was doing some breath work. And I was laying there doing breath work and thinking, oh, what am I going to have for dinner that night? Because I thought, well, there's a great seafood restaurant down the road, so I'll just go there. And the reality is, Judy was actually doing the group, and she actually touched my chest, and I went to being sexually abused. And I had not dealt with that particular issue. And so did a lot of work with that. Then I was asked if I wanted to become a certified trauma trainer. So I went ahead and did 5 modules, intensive modules down in Florida again. Becomes my second home, Ocala, Florida, with a lot of alligators. And it was an interesting process for me because I thought the aha moment came to me in realizing that this is what was missing with my clients. I could refer the clients to really good mental health therapists in the community, and I could refer them to good AA groups, and get sponsors, and go to NA groups, and stay sober. But so many of these people were missing this piece of the trauma, and being able to identify that. So what I started doing is doing trainings with my staff, and talking about that this is a process, folks, that we need to do. It's going to be a long process, but we need to start learning how to work with these people in a different way. Because what was happening with my clients is that the staff would go in, the client would act out, and immediately it was like this authoritative thing. You got to stop this behavior, go to your room, you can't have coffee tonight. Okay, or something like that. And this kind of behavior continued to keep going on. And so I started doing the intensive trainings with my staff, sending people out to different workshops, sending some of my staff down to do intensives themselves. And one of the things we started seeing is some different languages started to happen. And again, we're still doing a lot of work, with this process. But the clients were starting to report things were happening to them that they had not experienced in other treatment centers. We had for one example, I had a young man, early 30s, came to our program. He and his brother had both been through our program. Been through multiple programs in Minnesota, a couple of programs in New York, and New Jersey, and Florida. And he kept relapsing. He was just extremely frustrated. He's like, I can't kick this habit. I can't kick this habit. I've gone to therapy. I don't want to do this anymore. And the therapist at the time that was working for me had gotten trained in EMDR. And said, I think I'm getting a sense that we need to do some work with this. So I don't want to start explaining EMDR, but in a nutshell, this client started identifying issues around being sexually abused by a family member. In this particular individual, his family was a very prominent Italian family who owned restaurants in the Eastern Seaboard. So an uncle in that family abusing him was something that we just didn't want. They would not talk about it. It was not okay to talk about that. So he went through the process and started working through these issues. And it was pretty phenomenal to watch this young man kind of reopen himself up and really begin to identify who he was. And now identifying where the addiction was coming. You know, there's a disease, I understand that process, but that I was using on this and not even realizing this was really happening. So for a lot of men, they have difficulty being able to talk about that abuse because why me? Why did that man touch me or abuse me? Those kind of things. For me, my abuser was a woman, was my best friend's mother. And it was a very bizarre situation because when I got working in this field, everybody wants to hug. And it was like, if someone comes up to me and hugs me, I'm going to slap them. Because all I could think of was this woman coming and being really sexual with me, and reeking of alcohol and smoke and cheap perfume. And it kind of stayed with me. And I worked a lot of process. But that example with our clients is that we have to look differently in how we address these particular clients in not being authoritative, but maybe looking more of a nurturance. Going in and finding and coming to where they're at. What are you feeling right now? How do you see yourself right now? What's the feeling? Instead of, okay, you're angry, well, what's that anger? What's behind it? And working through those processes. One of the things that I had, when we were preparing for this, I had looked at a lot of different aspects of how to do this kind of work in a treatment setting or a mental health setting. And SAMHSA is essentially it's a national organization for addiction. And there's 4 processes that the trauma-informed approach is. It talks about realizing the widespread impact of the trauma and understanding its potential paths for recovery. And the second piece is recognizing the signs and symptoms of the trauma. And his clients, the family, the staff, and others involved in that system. Because when you look at it, it's kind of creating an environment of nurturance. And somewhat, you're kind of that surrogate family. From a therapist standpoint, working in the treatment setting, you're taking these people and you're starting to point out some of these things and giving them some of that nurturance and some of the care that they've been missing. Partly because of their addiction, their mental illness, their families. Most of the clients that we have in our program, their families are far gone. They're like, we don't want any more part of this. We've seen you in 13 other treatment centers. We have seen you in everything, and all the false promises, we don't want to do it anymore. Or the woman who comes into us who's had 5 children, all 5 children have been taken away because of her addiction. And yet, the other programs and that she's been through have never really taken a look at how much sexual abuse this woman's gone through as a child and being abused or being locked in a closet and being treated like an animal. Or have clients that have been locked on chains in a basement and being sexually abused by multiple people and then wondering why they come out and they're acting out some of the behaviors that they're acting out. I could go on and tell you 1,001 horror stories about what people in treatment, but that's not really what I need to do here, but it's horrific, but people can heal. Responding to fully integrating the knowledge about trauma and the policies and procedures, as we have, as me running a treatment program, I sleep on policies and procedures. I feel like it's like I live my life with policies and procedures. Plus, I have the state telling me this is what I have to do. But understandable. Seeking to actively resist the re-traumatization, and that's one of the things that's the help that I can give my staff and other people in the world, and telling you folks from all different walks of life about that there is hope out there, because acknowledging our brokenness is the first part of this. This is really that first step of looking at trauma, is we've got to acknowledge that we're broken. Because it's important. I mean, I look at, You know, I'm this professional person, I'm successful in my career, I've done a lot of really wonderful things, and I've also had some real horrific things happening in my life. And I've survived it, but I also had to do work around that. And I couldn't do that alone without the support of people who are in the field and who are willing to do this kind of work. And so that I hope that we as, you know, as a center, I'm actually tomorrow looking at a new facility. Hopefully, if all the stars align, that I could actually move. I'm looking at buying a very large farm, an old estate. It was actually an orphanage.